Hello, today we're going to talk about introduction to styling. So the first question we must ask ourselves is, what is a stylist? Now, this language might get a little flowery here, but it's really important to know that the stylist plays a very important role in the fashion system. So a stylist is a visual communicator who uses fashion, accessories, hair, and makeup to communicate a specific message to a specific audience. And that's as basic as we can get it. So if we think of the stylist as the author of that message, they must understand who their audience is to create a response in them. Now, this is a little bit soft and a little bit flowery, but they are a painter with clothes, a sculptor with fabric. The skills used to be a stylist are the same as a painter, as a sculptor, as a fashion designer. Your medium is just different. Now, styling is often pure fantasy, and when we examine imagery, we might see that it seems incongruous, or it seems absurd, or it seems a bit crazy. But the authenticity, and I say here it must look authentic and in context at all times, the authenticity is what makes the styling work. So what do stylists do? Well, let's jump into it. So they work in a variety of mediums, from catwalk, editorial, catalogue to personal styling. Now, I have a video on those different sectors, so please do jump in and watch each one of those. But as a stylist, you require practical skills as well as conceptual skills. So not just conceptual skills in the sense that you're thinking of new things, but practical skills in things like project management, organization, communication. Your ability to generate an innovative concept and to translate into innovative styling will give you the edge in a cutthroat industry. Now, that is to say that the thing that people are going to be hiring aren't necessarily your abilities to put clothing together. Now, that's part of it, but that only comes as a result of having an interesting idea. It's not actually that difficult to put a range of garments together. It is very difficult to do it in an innovative and interesting way. So what does the job involve? Styling, let's see. A lot of this, a lot of hustling. As a stylist, you'll be talking to people to try and get more budget, to try and get more product, to try and get more time, to try and get more. Your job involves a lot of hustling, so networking, communicating is important. Secondly, innovating, and that means thinking of new ways to do things, cheap ways to do things, easy ways to do things, but new ways of presenting to an old type of clientele, perhaps. The fashion industry is notoriously slow to change, despite being one of the most fast-paced industries in the world. So as stylists, we must be thinking about different ways we can use those skills to maybe convince those patrons, convince those clients to see things in a different way. You'll be doing so much planning, it's not even funny. Styling is effectively project management. Now, you'll be managing projects like shoots, or campaigns, or catwalk, or film, or personal styling, but it requires a lot of forethought and a lot of planning. And it also requires a lot of sourcing. So not only will you be sourcing things like garments and accessories, you'll be looking for models, and you'll be looking for locations and other creatives. Sourcing these kinds of things is very, very important. You'll be documenting your work. So not only documenting your research, documenting the process of the work, but planning the work. That requires documentation. Even things like invoicing and managing expenses and other finances, and those of your creatives and your team are very important. You'll be producing. Now, producing here means actually doing the work. So producing an editorial campaign requires photo shoots, it requires planning, it requires sourcing, but overall that finished product is produced. You'll be debriefing. Now, that might be debriefing your team on how well a shoot went, or how well a campaign worked, or it might be being debriefed by a client, or debriefing a client on the success of a campaign, or how something has progressed. Now, that requires a lot of really significant listening skills to understand the point of view of somebody other than you. Signing off is a key thing in all professional environments, especially in the fashion industry. So at some point, somebody's going to have to agree to give you the money to do something. So that means signing off. So that means having a package available for somebody to agree to and to hand you a check. Now, if we think about how all these things might work together, they're all harnessed together in your communication and your vision. Your vision as a creative and your communication as a professional. Well, what do you need to know to become a stylist? Lots of things, I imagine. So, as a stylist, it's important that you become an autodidact, a person who educates themselves in all aspects of fashion. So, autodidact is just a very fancy way of saying self-educated. But it means that you really must connect to a kind of a mainline vein of fashion history that goes back goes back millennia really, but in terms of contemporary culture, it goes back 150 years or so. And it means being conscious not only of fashion terminology, but you have to understand fit, fabric, and finish. You must also have an awareness of fashion history, significant style icons, and fashion's impact on culture. What we see is people respond to these kinds of iconic images in fashion without perhaps even a real awareness that they've been exposed to them throughout their life. Now, you need to connect to the pulse of cultural change and be at the forefront of it. So that means you're the first thing that people see when they think of a new trend or a new idea. So they think, oh, I saw that in X magazine. I saw that on X social media channel. I saw that in X advertising campaign. And it's important to be that first person. That makes that person reading it, your client, your ultimate consumer, feel very excited and very special. So first things first, let's talk about trend forecasting. So here's our XY axis, and you can see we have number of people here and length of time. And the way a basic trend might travel is something like this fairly wonky but still okay bell curve. Now, if we look at the different aspects of this bell curve, we can see at the front end here are the innovators. Now, this is really where you want to be if you're doing, say, something like editorial styling, because what you're trying to do is appeal to those few people who are kind of birthing a trend. And then we have what we call our early adopters. So they're kind of consumers or people who exist kind of in the mainstream, but who are quick to take up a new trend or idea. Then we have really the bread and butter of a stylist. That's the mass market. So if you're working in the commercial sector, you'll be doing a lot of work in the mass market, in the kind of big meaty area of production. And if we think about where this might sit in terms of the fashion industry, this is your high street right there. Then we might have our late adopters. Now, these things are changing, but our late adopters are effectively those kind of people who, come at a trend kind of towards the very end. Once they've seen it and it's seen as very, very safe, and it's lasted a length of time and reached a number of people, then they'll kind of bring it in. This is where we can see kind of your supermarket brands, George Astor, those kinds of things, bringing in kind of products and ideas that know will work. So when it comes to your job as a stylist, this is probably where we're talking catalogue work more than anything else in our kind of later adopter stage. And at the very end here, we have my favourite term in trend forecasting called laggards. Now, laggards are kind of people who come to trends way, way, way late. It's like your dad showing up next week with a fidget spinner that he's just bought, saying how cool he is. He's 2 years out of date and he's come to it very, very late in the game. At the University of South Wales, we use a trend forecasting service called WGSN. Now, these services are very well known in the fashion industry, and they will predict things 2-3 years in advance. And they do this by connecting to cultural change. So when we look at our trend forecasting, it's not actually just looking at fashion trends, but cultural trends. So something like TikTok would be predicted using this kind of model. The next thing you have to be really mindful of is brand awareness. Now that means understanding your brand or client is a very important part of the industry, but it must be the focus of your initial research to figure out who someone is. You need to know all of that foundational knowledge before you can figure out where to take them. Now this is really important. As a stylist, you'll be selling an idea, not necessarily you. It's not about your preferences. It's about the idea that you can bring to that client or that brand. But that being said, it's important that you understand that what the brand needs might be slightly different to what they want. They might, need to sell more product, but might not want to appear, any different than they have in the past. Now, this might mean that you take them into a slightly uncomfortable place, but we can see that that's had great success in recent years with things like brands loosening their stranglehold on their social media accounts, for example. Brands becoming a little bit more kind of sassy, a little bit communicative in terms of communicating with their clients directly in social media has meant that brands have kind of been given a new edge, or and a great example of this is Wendy's, the fast food brand in the US, who've somehow become cool and a bit edgy and a bit kind of connected to Gen Z, when in reality they're a 70-year-old burger chain. Now, to do the job as a stylist really well, you need to build a resource. Now, building a resource is about connecting to the world and recording the world. And I say this throughout your career as a stylist, it's important that you continuously build your own resource library. Now, the best way to do this is via a visual diary. Now, a visual diary might be called something like a sketchbook, but I prefer the term visual diary because it doesn't indicate that it's a specific thing, like a physical book, for example. But if we see here, I've said, use your diary to record your concepts, inspiration, and ideas. A visual diary is not a scrapbook, but it's a tool to help push yourself as a stylist. So that means that you're recording constantly. You're writing things down, writing your ideas, maybe recording them on blogs or recording them on your own website or via your social channels, these kinds of things. And you create this kind of in-depth research that you can draw down on later, things that just kind of click to you in the middle of the night. But it means that you put your research to good use. And when we say research, we mean two different kinds of research. Active research, so that's doing things, so trying ideas, putting them out for people to look at, trialing styling ideas at home, taking photos, chucking them on social media, seeing what response you get, or going to trade shows or fashion weeks, or even just walking on the street and seeing the clothes that people wear and the way they buy their clothes. And passive research. So passive research we might see as things like trolling through social media, jumping on the internet and Googling things, reading about a brand, that kind of stuff. Both are very, very important. Now, all of this kind of research goes to build this resource as a designer, and it means that you're able to draw on it really quickly. It's very, very difficult to come up with a whole bunch of new ideas if you've never done any research. Yes. Well, how do you create a resource library? Well, follow some people. The simplest way to do that is to connect to some artists, photographers, designers, stylists, tastemakers. Now, tastemakers are interesting people. They're not necessarily broadly known public figures. So, for example, I would say that Kim Kardashian is not a tastemaker. She might be an influencer, might be a celebrity. But a tastemaker is a person who impacts large cultural movements. Now, I'm trying to think of a British example, but we might use an American example for this. We might say someone like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was, unfortunately, she's now dead, but a Supreme Court justice in the US. Now, in terms of her sartorial taste, her fashion taste, she was very simple and very plain. But that aesthetic stood for her personality as a judge, and she brought in landmark decisions about same-sex marriage and about abortion and equality and lots of things like that. So she helps shape the taste of a generation, of a nation, of a group of people. Then we look at makeup artists, hairdressers, advertisers, publishers, bloggers, the fashion media in a broader sense, cultural movements, very, very important. BLM connects to this. The Me Too movement connects to this. These ideas that they are cultural movements, they're political and cultural movements. Understanding contemporary music, understanding contemporary film, reading contemporary philosophy. The death of capitalism is somehow happening here in 2020 in the midst of a global pandemic. These are kind of interesting, exciting, vibrant, tumultuous, crazy times we live in. Basically, we want you to look at anything that will help you change the world. Yeah, and while that seems like a really lofty goal, even in terms of styling, we do that in a very small way. Everything starts here. Everything starts with a concept. No matter the context, all styling starts with a concept. Now, I've created a much longer video about concept development, and it is focused on designers, but the message is still the same for styling and designing, because as we said before, it's just the medium that's different. So where do we start? We start with this. What is your message? What are you saying? What are you visually trying to communicate? What is important to you or to your client? And how can we boil that down to a really succinct thing? It might be something like buy more shoes. That's totally fine. Okay, once we have that message, we can build everything around it. What is your intent? So how do you want people to respond to the message? In the case of the example of our message being buy more shoes, our intent is we want them to visit our website and maybe buy some shoes. It's really important to have kind of a clear action as a result of your message. Now, in the case of something like BLM, It might be a political response. So the intent is for people to vote or to recognize injustice in the world. And then lastly, an audience. So your audience is, who are you telling this message to? So the way you might communicate to a child as a consumer is really different to the way you might communicate to an adult as a consumer. The way you might communicate to someone who has no real background in connecting to the fashion world is really different to how you might communicate to the creative director of a magazine, for example. So understanding these three things will help you underpin and help you communicate your ideas and your approach to styling. Thank you so much for watching. Connect with us on Instagram and say hi. Thanks.